Former South Carolina attorney Alec Murdaugh will face a jury on 4 counts, including murder charges surrounding the death of his wife Maggie and his youngest son Paul. Now, Murdaugh claims he has an alibi. He was on his way to his mom's house at the time of the murders. Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson has more on the defense's case and the timeline of events the night his wife and son were killed.
I've been up to it now. It's bad.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Since his arrest, Alec Murdaugh has said he had nothing to do with the brutal murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul at their sprawling South Carolina Moselle property.
He believes he's innocent, avers he's innocent, and 2, he believes that the killer or killers are still at large, and this would allow Swed to put this behind him and go look for the real killers.
Prosecutors have revealed that Maggie and Paul were shot and killed between the hours of 8:30 p.m. and 10:06 p.m. on June 7, 2021.
I've been told by attorneys who are close to the family that he has an ironclad alibi.
Defense attorneys filed this notice of alibi, stating Murdaugh was not present at the time, place, or date of the murders. In the HBO documentary Low Country, The Murdaugh Dynasty, defense attorney Jim Griffin said the evening started out with Alec and Paul riding around and inspecting the property. This after news earlier in the day that Alec Murdaugh's father had been moved to hospice care.
They were just, hanging out together. And then they met their mother and they had dinner.
According to Griffin, after dinner, Maggie went out to the dog kennels. Paul went outside, and Alec took a nap.
And he woke up about 9 o'clock, and he wanted to go check on his mother. So he tries to call Maggie first, and she doesn't answer. And he tries to call Paul, and he doesn't answer. And he texts Maggie and says, "I'll be right back." He leaves, and he is on his phone from 9:03 through 9:21.
Court documents state that Alec made several phone calls during that 18-minute drive, speaking with his son Buster, his brother John Marvin, John's wife Liz, attorney and longtime friend Chris Wilson, and the family's groundkeeper C.B. Rowe. Then, at approximately 9:20, Murdaugh arrived here, visiting with his mother Libby Murdaugh, who suffers from dementia, and her nurse Shelley Smith until about 9:45.
He was with her about 20 minutes from Moselle.
Okay, so he has an alibi, but his alibi witness I don't think would be able to testify.
Defense attorneys say that while on the drive home, Alec spoke again with Chris Wilson. The document doesn't say what the two discussed, but the state argues that Murdaugh was confronted earlier this same day by an employee at Murdaugh's law firm over missing attorney's fees involving a case Murdaugh and Wilson had worked on. After this call to Wilson, Alec arrives home.
And then he arrives back to Moselle a little bit after 10 o'clock. The house was still locked up, and there'd been no sign that either Paul or Maggie had come into the house. He got back in his car and drove down to the dog kennel. And that's where he discovers her body.
Do you see anyone in the area?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Did you hear anything, or did you come home and find them?
No, ma'am. I've been gone. I just came back.
All right, let's take a look now at some of the evidence that we know the state plans to present at trial. The state says they have cell phone location data taken from the defendant's cell phone, which places him at the scene around the time of the murder. The state also has video evidence taken by one of the victims, Paul Murdaugh. The state says it shows Alec at the scene on the night of the killings. And the state plans to introduce evidence of blood spatter on the T-shirt that Alec was wearing. Alec says the blood was transferred to his shirt when he touched the bodies after finding them. All right, still with me, criminal defense attorney Elizabeth J.C. Baker. Elizabeth, what's interesting here is that this could really go either way, because if you notice, the timing is very close to the time of the murders when he allegedly was taking a nap. Then he goes and visits his mom and her nurse. Again, people who are very friendly and kind to him. They could certainly, I don't know if mom can testify, she's got dementia and other issues, but the nurse could certainly be someone friendly to the family, will testify on his behalf. What do you make of the evidence in this case thus far?
Well, I'm pretty interested in the cell data, frankly. You know, it's sort of the cutting edge of evidence, and we see, you know, state and federal agencies relying on cell data, tower data, GPS location data. And, you know, we would like to say it's an exact pinpoint. And the real question for this jury is going to be, is it? Was it in this particular case? What was the traffic like at the cell towers associated with whatever activity that there was? And what kind of activity was it? It sounds like there are several people who are going to be indicating that he was en route. And, you know, I'm unclear at this point whether he was talking on his phone as a, it was a handheld unit, or perhaps his phone vehicle, and those people could hear his vehicle running, you know, as we often do when you're talking on your cell phone, it hooks up to your vehicle. So that's the evidence that I would find pretty interesting if I were a finder of fact in this case. Regarding the blood transfer, that does seem pretty logical. I think if you were to come upon a loved one and they'd been grievously wounded or killed, you probably would check their pulse or kneel down to, you know, touch them in some way, at least because, you know, during a 911 call, people are likely to ask, you know, what is their condition? And that doesn't sound to me like it would be something extremely unusual for a person who comes upon, you know, such a horrific scene.
Yeah, and if he goes over to his mother's house after the murders, they would see the blood on him. But one of the big issues about that blood evidence, Elizabeth, is there's a claim by the state that they had an expert look at it and that it's blood spatter that would have been caused by the use of a shotgun in the killing of these two victims. Now, the blood, they did testing. SLED, which is the South Carolina special department where they do that type of testing, and it didn't come up as human blood. And number one, the original report by that expert said it wasn't blood spatter. Only he changed it after he got a visit from the investigators in the case. So that blood evidence could be something that's very much contested in court, which again would make it difficult for prosecutors.
Well, I agree. And, you know, I think that spatter is one term that we can use, and it's just basically transfer, and it's transfer through the air, frankly. But, you know, if the state's allegation is that he used a shotgun at such a close range, I'm surprised we don't have something more like tissue or other matter, you know, from the injuries itself, if this man is accused of having used the weapon so closely to both the victims in this case. Regarding whether or not that's human blood, a lot of those preliminary forensic tests that occur can determine just simply if there's blood. Later DNA or other testing is going to have to assess if it is blood, if it's human blood, if it's some other kind of blood. You can get some false positives. You rarely get a false negative. It just depends on what they were using to assess that, whether it was actually visible. But it seems like DNA testing would put the end to whether or not either of these persons left blood on the defendant's clothing. I still don't see that even a small amount of blood, once you find this horrific scene, would be all that unusual. Frankly, a lot of people might reach down and touch and then wipe their own clothing.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it's the type of evidence. So, for instance, if it's spatter, they're saying that comes from a gunshot as opposed to a smearing or something that would come when you're actually touching someone and it's transferred that way. That's kind of the argument being made by the defense. The problem is the T-shirt was ruined by the testing of the state, and the defense hasn't really had a chance and won't have a chance to test it. So all these issues coming up in this trial. It's going to be a hot one.